All right, today I've got a great brother in front of me, man. Strong brother. Has some strong roots. Being a descendant of Alabama, man. Birmingham, Alabama, where a lot of history, man. A lot of history is taking place in that great state, man. Anthony, what's going on in Birmingham, Alabama, man? From a historical standpoint, from the beginning until now, just short.
What, Birmingham?
Yeah.
Oh wow. Birmingham's like a lot of chocolate cities, man. I don't keep tabs of like I used to a while back. I graduated high school there. I haven't been back really. I go visit family for a couple of days. I joined the military, went off, and I visit. But I try to keep tabs a little bit. I know that in the city itself, there's a lot of redevelopment. Some would say a lot of gentrification. Jefferson County, which is the county in which Birmingham's in, and I think it's going through some bankruptcy. Some issues very similar to, not as drastic as Detroit is going through, but they're going through a lot of that. Definitely very much. It's a lot of segregation there because you got white flight. A lot of people left the city. White folks went over the mountain, as they call it, and black folks. It's still pretty much a chocolate city for the most part. But it's still like a lot of urban cities today, man. Even in Salisbury on a smaller scale. But like issues you see in Charlotte, some of the southern cities, urban cities, some of the same issues, man. They still have a very much strong sense of civic engagement. You got black folks that don't take it lying down. You see much more sense of agency, a much more sense of civic engagement than I've seen in other places living in the South.
Right.
Yeah, but.
Well, I appreciate that, man. That synopsis of Alabama, man. I've never been in a great state before, but just to walk the land, man, knowing some of the things that are taking place there, man, it's gotta put hives on your body, man. Chills run through your soul. Bombing of churches, Jim Crow, George Wallace, the list goes on, man. So that's a wealth of information. It's a wealth of knowledge to be from a place of that magnitude. Brother Smith, being a bipartisan resident here in Rowan County, man. First of all, how long have you lived in Rowan County?
Altogether, I would say about 4 years now.
4 years, man. You're doing a lot in 4 years, man, and we'll get to that here in a little bit. But just being a bipartisan resident of Rowan County, what's alarming to you in terms of egalitarianism? Or is there such?
Wow, that's a good question, man. I just say, and by egalitarianism, I think you mean like people just really want equality, in the community. Honestly, man, I'm a little alarmed by the level of apathy, man. And I understand that, though. There's a history behind that. There tends to be a little apathy. A lot of people feel powerless in the face of these larger issues that are happening in the community. Of course, I'm still learning the history of Salisbury in particular. I don't go out much outside Salisbury that much. Maybe through Landis, North Kannapolis, but I have not really had a chance to really tour the entire county yet, as much as I'd like. But sitting here, living here in the county seat, I guess what alarms me is the apathy piece, the large sense of powerlessness that people feel when you talk to people. They feel like their voice. You got people living in their communities, they're doing life with their families, taking care of each other, taking care of themselves. But when it comes to these larger issues that impact the entire community, man, people tend to be very apathetic, man. And I don't say it as a judgment, like some kind of condemnation or something like that. It is what it is. And, in studying the history of this place, I'm studying history going back in Salisbury, all the way back to the Reconstruction period after the Civil War. And a lot of people here, there's never been a sense of, I think there's been some people, individuals, civil rights leaders and things like that, maybe, I don't know. I mean, I'm learning about a few as of late, but it seems to be pretty much people have been pacified.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, this is not known to be a place of resistance. People trying to just, this is going to get along. You're not going to rock the boat. You know what I'm saying? Everybody's playing in their sandbox. You stay in your sandbox, I stay in my sandbox. Don't set none on fire. We good. Yeah, that's the sense I get.
Tell you what, man. In 4 years, I think you've observed Salisbury quite well, because those are some of the characteristics that we've seen for quite some time, man.
The level of poverty for children under the age of 18 here is startling. The young number in particular, you got different groups here, but the number of young black men that are incarcerated or that are part of the criminal justice system here, and just the inequality of wealth that's here, the vast gap between the haves and the have-nots, and how the haves are having a whole set of conversations that the have-nots are not even a part of. People have dreams and they have these stories that they tell themselves in a half part, but I don't see the bridge. I see people making some effort, but I don't see strong enough bridges to try to bridge that inequality gap, that achievement gap. And you got people that are making some heroic efforts here to make some differences. Matter of fact, I just talked to a guy involved with Team Court. His name is David Sidigny. And just getting to know him a little better and just learning about his program, where he's trying to stave off, trying to prevent more kids who get in trouble in school from getting caught up in the system. So he offers an alternative, what they call restorative justice, to prevent them. So we got people like that, man, that are working in the community. And that's another thing too, man. Another thing that alarms me is that you got so many people in this community that do good things, but they're not connected. They don't even know they even exist. And something's got to be done about that. We got to find a way to build have a network of networks, collaboration across the board. So that's something that really alarms me. But you got some good people, man, doing some good things here. You got Tommy Miller Cross, man, with Divine Events. You got different people I'm connected with, Rowan Concerned Citizens. The things that you're doing, things you have done, North Rowan Connection, the Chamber, in different ministries, different churches, nonprofits doing things. Man, it's a long list. The racism, that's alarming.
Speak on it, brother.
And I'm one of these people, like, personal prejudice is one thing. I can't fault white man who's in his 50s and 60s or 70s who's, prejudiced. That's the world he grew up in. You know what I'm saying? I can deal with people. I know people like that. But there's larger systems, that we tend to be in denial about. The blind spot of leadership, not, as far as I can tell, people not directly addressing systemic racism. If they are, they do it behind closed doors. You don't hear things about anti-oppression, anti-racism workshops. If you do, you hear about it in the margins. You hear about community activists, but you don't hear it in our institutions, right? You hear things like, "Hey, let's get along, right? Let's kumbaya, let's hold hands and sing songs together," things like that. But you don't hear people trying to uncover privilege and uncover economic inequality that's tied to a racial past, But, the blind spot here on that issue, man, is startling. It's alarming, man.
You said something a couple of seconds ago about privilege.
Yeah.
And I talk about that a lot on some of my Facebook posts to individuals. And the first thing that I'm hit with all the time when I talk about privilege, I'm playing the race card, or I need to get out and pull myself up by the bootstraps and those types of things. Talk about what's privilege, Anthony Smith. What's privilege?
Privilege is, as an example, privilege. When a lot of veterans came back from World War II, as an example, a lot of educational benefits, a lot of financial benefits like house loans, home loans, GI Bill, were disproportionately offered to whites, right? And in some cases, blacks didn't get any kind of benefits coming back, because a lot of people went off the war, Vietnam War. We had a lot of veterans come back, and they were like, "What are we going to do with these guys? What kind of jobs they're going to have?" So they send them to school to get education, and that formed that would help. That's actually what helped grow the middle class in this country, expanded the middle class. And so you had some blacks kind of made it in, they got their GI Bill and things like that. But that was also the beginning of the civil rights generation. They came back saying, we can fight a war, but you still don't recognize us as citizens, right? And so what happened with that is a certain group of people, and this is the history of this country, contrary to the mythology, the myth that it's always been an equal playing field, and it has not. Anybody that reads anything with American history, truly American history, like really engage this thing, would see that people have had a certain advantage over other people, right? And we're talking about centuries of advantage. Right? We're not talking about just a generation. We're talking about multi-generational advantage. And so when you live in that world and you've been a beneficiary of that advantage, it's hard for you to see when others have not, they've been attached to generations that have not had that advantage, right? And so when I say these things, I don't say these things as an excuse, but when I say these things, because a part of privilege is, a lot of times people who are in privilege, they assume that everybody has had the same experience in this country as they have. That's why sometimes it blows people. I have white friends, and when they first become aware that, okay, yeah, I realize I'm privileged, when they realize they're white people. Right? Because a lot of times white people, they see themselves as people.
Right.
I'm just a person. Right? Well, you have that privilege to say that. Because when me and you, or my daughter, who's, we walk in the grocery store, and we're sitting in the line, the grocery line, and we look over to the magazine rack, and all the beauties and the models of the magazine rack, they're mostly white. And if they're us, they're lightened up on the magazine. So Oprah like a light-skinned sister on the magazine, right? And so we see that. That's our world. We see that because it's always in our face. We're always reminded that we are different, right? But when the world's constructed for you, everything, right? Because people don't understand things like, space. Buildings, right? And so basically privileges, man, is most of it's unconscious. People are unaware that there's certain things they don't have to deal with, right? People don't know what it's like to have to be followed in a restaurant or followed around in a department store, right? Or when you're walking down in the parking lot in an upscale area somewhere, and all of a sudden you hear doors locking as you're walking into the store because people are afraid, right? So some people are not, they don't have those kind of experiences.
Right.
And like as an example, this is another example. Years ago, I had a good friend of mine doing some work together. We did some racial reconciliation work together. And I had to go speak at a liberal arts college up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And it's a really prominent liberal arts college in that area. And I was one of the speakers at this conference. And he was too, he was a white brother. And so we were sitting there, we had a breakout session, so we're out on a break, out in the hallway, and we're talking with each other, and our names are on the program, and I got my little sticker, Anthony Smith, speaker, whatever. And this white female professor, walks up to me and him, and she says to me, "So when are you going to change the water out?" Right?
Right.
Now, see, my white friend had never experienced that before. Right? That's privilege. You're not aware of this kind of reality. Right? And so people who are quick to dismiss that's an act of privilege. Because you've demonstrated that you actually have not been a scientist and try to observe and really investigate this thing. Because if you get information about racial history from Fox News and Rush Limbaugh, you're going to be completely ignorant of racial history in this country. So I always advise people, especially white folks and black folks and brown folks, to really look into history. Become a scientist. Be rigorous with that thing. So.
Dig it. To give you a word, man, a term, and you've been, I've seen you out with the night crawlers, man, and you guys been into some communities, man, urban communities, both on the west side and the east side of Rowan County, and I'm sure that you've seen some circumstances and some dire situations.
Yeah.
And this is in this particular word or term is for those that are in those communities that are in dire situations that may not understand the term, but will eventually understand the term when those folks with neckties come in and start the process. And that term, which I want you to expound on, is gentrification.
Oh, yeah. Gentrification basically is a process by which a community has low property value. And it has low property value for a number of reasons. Crime, the population that's present, whoever that is, the racial population, right? And so normally what that is usually like communities of working class, poor black folk, right? And if a certain group with power see like, wow, that real estate can be really useful to the economic development of the center, right? It would be great if we could have young people move in, young white folk move in, and they'll spruce up the environment, they'll redecorate or renovate houses, make them nice, and they'll be connected with the city center, right? So it's like the perfect thing. We can go in, so what happens is, as young, and typically this is what happens, as young whites go in, probably just got out of college, maybe did the first time into the workforce, or maybe already in their profession. They have a certain salary, whatever. They go in, they get a house and make it real nice. And next thing you know, it's one here, two here. Next thing is a whole neighborhood, a whole row of young, upcoming, professional white people. And what happens? Well, one of the things that begin to happen is the people that are already there, who live in those communities for a generation or two or three generations, they didn't have to worry about paying a certain tax rate, right? Because they realize the income in that neighborhood is not so high.
Right.
They don't have a lot of resources. But when a certain income comes in, a certain tax base comes in, taxes go up, right? And so a part of that is, and property value goes up. Property taxes go up. And so if you're poor, if you're working class, you can't afford that. And so what begins to happen? You get pushed out your neighborhood. Right? And the neighborhood changes culturally. Right? And so you have a Starbucks, pow, right in front of your neighborhood. And you're like, most black people in your community probably go to Starbucks.
Right.
For cultural reasons, right? And so it's almost like a certain culture comes into a community, like an alien culture comes in, set up rule, establish your own little economy, own little culture, and literally it pushes people out who don't have a lot of resources. That's a skinnier gentrification. That's a skinnier. Basically, it's people with power pushing people without power out of the community. essentially what it is, because they can't live there anymore. They can't afford to live there anymore. And it's coming here,
Oh, it's
rapid fashion.
no doubt. There's no doubt in my mind.
So I hope that those who are in political leadership in the city are paying attention to that.
Right.
They're having conversations about mixed use or mixed economy, mixed income households and apartment complexes. Certain, mixed income communities, and where we won't have we won't have this level of tax base as increase, but we'll have mixed tax base in a community. And hopefully they're having those kind of conversations, because if they don't, what's going to happen is you'll see black folks on the margins of Salisbury living out in the county.
Right.
Or relegated to certain parts of Salisbury, isolated. And I don't think they want that.
And
They shouldn't want that.
and you're absolutely right. Other words that stem from the word gentrification, and I try to get people to understand these code words. Annexation, ETJs, those types of words, because the language sometimes, man, is in the language. And if you don't understand the terminology or the language, then it's almost like having a court-appointed attorney, man. And when the time comes, you don't know why you're out on the street when you could have known ahead of time. But go ahead.
You ever heard of? He's considered the father of post-colonial thought. His name is Frantz Fanon.
Frantz Fanon. And
he was over in Africa, man. He was biracial, half French, half, I want to say Nigerian. Swilly probably correct.
Swilly is.
But the country that he's from, Martinique, is what it is. And so anyway, there's a quote from Frantz Fanon. Frantz Fanon said something powerful one time. He says, language assumes a civilization.
Right.
So if you're not privy to a certain language, if you don't understand a certain language, you don't understand that world. Right? So language literally is gateway into a particular universe, a particular world that people live in, a particular community. Right? And so like me and you, man, like we can converse with certain people in a certain language, right? Because we know where we're at.
Right.
Right? Because black people, we've always had to be what they call bilingual.
That's right.
Right. And in some cases, trilingual and quadlingual. Right? Because if you talk to affluent whites, for instance, there's a certain language they understand, they deal with. You deal with middle class whites, a certain language they understand. Right? You deal with poor whites, there's a certain language they understand. Like our own people. Right? There's certain language that we speak in certain places that we don't like. The language I'm using now, gentrification and all that we talking about.
Right.
Like, so my family, we won't even talk like that.
Right.
We use different language. So language, our people got to understand that language gives you entry into a world. And so a lot of times people use big words, they run away from the words, but you got to be careful when people start using certain words you don't understand.
Right.
Especially in your presence, especially with those who have power, especially when they start talking about changing stuff. Right? We got to pay attention to that stuff. So I'll be like, so what do you mean by that?
Right.
So I'm going to write down what you say, but then I'm going to go research what it really says. Right? Oh, we're not going to do gentrification. We're just going to enhance the community.
Right.
Right? We're gonna become a community of cultural creatives. Right? Richard Florida.
Right.
Cultural creators, right? And that's a language, that's that language again.
Right.
Right? That's when professional young whites come in, artistic, innovative, tech type folk, they come in and they push people of color out.
Right.
They push poor folk out. But we don't understand that language, that's what that usually means. That's usually how it plays out in some communities, man. People don't want to say that, but that's what happens.
And we see it all the time, man. Yeah. Especially in the courtroom. I mean, it's it's rampant there. And this is why you need an attorney, a mouthpiece when you go to court, because of the language. I've seen guys. My mom's retired now from the Circuit Court after 34 years, man. So I kind of grew up around the courthouse and go to the courtroom during a lunch break. And I've seen guys get time because they didn't understand the language.
Right.
they were maybe guilty of this but wasn't guilty of that. And then you got the a secretary reading that document, man, and the district attorney's going through that document and listing all these charges. And next thing you know, this guy's doing 10 years, and it was for something, a petty crime.
Yeah,
So everything is in the language, man, and you're absolutely 100% right.
And see, where do we learn about language? See, that's another thing. See, some people say, well, you need to learn how to read. You need to learn the language. You need to, so they'll pick on young brothers because they don't know the language. I'm like, well, what are they supposed to learn?
Right.
Well, they're supposed to learn in school. They're supposed to learn in church. In particular, church. Church is supposed to be one of the places where you're taught how to interpret the world. Where you're taught how to interpret power. And that's what Jesus did. Jesus interpreted power.
Speak on it, brother. Speak on it.
Man.
Go ahead. We can have church right here, brother. Go ahead. Speak on it.
And I'm speaking as a pastor. I'm a pastor. So it's like, when you see Jesus out on the side of the mountain and he's giving these parables and he's telling these stories, what he's doing is he's empowering poor people in his community to be able to interpret what's happening on a political economic scale. Like, for instance, let me give an example. Now, you heard about the parable of the talents, right?
That's right.
Right. So he had 3 cats. One dude got a talent. He got a whole bunch of talents, monies to go invest in something. Right. The other guy has a talent. He gets a mid amount of talents, a middle amount of talents, and the other dude gets some talent. Right. They all get talents, and so one dude goes off, invests his talent. Other guy goes off, invests his talent, gets a return. First guy gets a return. Third guy goes, buries it. Now, depending upon which gospel you're reading, because each gospel has a different telling of this.
Right, come on.
But one of the gospel tellings of it says that the guy who buried his talent, he comes back. They all come back. The guy who actually invested, gets a return. He says, "Hey, Lord, I was faithful with my talent. I used it. It's all great, faithful servant, whatever he uses, whatever translation you read." Second guy says, "I invested, I got a return." Third guy, "I buried it." Right.
Right.
And one of Jesus' tellings of that, Christians have used that to say, so you got to use your abilities, you got to use your talents, you got to go out in the world and get your return on investment, right? But that's not what Jesus is saying. In that particular parable, the overlord is not God, it's not Jesus. It's a very wealthy overlord over a land, a nobleman over a land, and he has these 2 guys who go out, and what they are, they're like tax collectors. They're like loan sharks.
Right.
Right? And so he's breaking into that world, because back in the day, when Jesus' day, when you were a farmer, most of the times you worked the land for a nobleman.
That's right. Indentured.
Indentured, right? You were paying off a debt.
Right.
But if you owned your land, right? If you owned your land and you had a hard time paying your taxes, you would go get a loan.
Right.
Right. And so the guys in that story are the guys who gave the loans. They took that money that was invested, the nobleman gave the loaner, the loan shark. So the first guy who uses it, he goes, gets land from poor farmers. That's his return on investment. Right?
Right.
Second guy goes with his talent, his loan money, gets land from farmers. That's the return on investment. He gets more land for the nobleman. But the guy who refuses to go get loans and take land from poor people, he buries it. In the story, he's actually the hero, not the bad guy. He's like the whistleblower. He's the guy who refuses to participate in the system. He's the guy who refuses to take land from poor farmers. But the way the church reads that sometimes is like, oh, we gotta use your talents and your abilities, but we don't see the deeper critique that Jesus is giving to Roman society. So my larger point is that we can go to church our whole lives and not be taught these larger human systems and how they're broken. Right. And how they use the resources of those in the margins to the advantage of those who have power. Right. And Jesus is all about that, man. But church will be one of those places where you're taught how to interpret the world. That's right. Power, economy, politics, right? Because the church or spiritual entities can be either servants of the system or be prophets to the system.
Right.
Right? And Jesus was one of those cats. He was a prophet to the system. Right? So church should be one of those places where you learn to give lens, eyes to see. That's what Jesus talked about all the time. They don't have eyes to see. They don't have ears to hear what's happening here.
Right.
That's why they don't understand me. He would tell parables. They said, they don't have eyes to see. They don't have ears to hear. So church is supposed to be one of those places where you're given eyes to see and ears to hear. You see what's going on. You hear what's going on. You hear what those in power say is going on, but you know better now. You know what's really going on.
Right.
You see, church is supposed to be that space where you're taught that.
Well, I'll be honest with you. Well, I'll refrain from that comment that I was about to make. But
in public school, and your family, right? Like, Kawanja Kajufu, man, dude, really wrote a lot about black families, black household, young black men, and that whole system, how the system's against them and all that. He has this term that he calls negative Negro households.
Speak on it, brother.
And negative Negro households are households where you got more entertainment than you got books.
Lord, talk to me. Lord, let me interrupt for a second. I just had this conversation about a month ago. Went to a household, mentoring this young man. He forgot something. I took it to his house. 100-inch screen TV on the wall.
Yeah.
Not one book in the house.
Yeah, man.
And people think that I'm being cynical about that, but that's real, man. There's not one book in the house, and there's a theater canvas on the wall.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, brother. Go ahead.
You gotta come to my house, man.
Yeah, go.
I drive my wife crazy.
I know you got them everywhere.
Yeah, I got a wall. We have in our living room where we have our television, things like that. I got a whole wall. I got 3 bookshelves of books. Like the whole wall is books. And then I got several books in storage, right? But the thing is, I was talking about my mentor early on that, you should have more books in your house than you have entertainment, period.
Right.
Just the fact they're present.
That's right.
Right. It says a lot about, you know what I'm saying? And I don't say there's a judgment of people who don't do that. But the thing is, if we're going to turn this thing around, we got to start creating households that has more literature in it. And if you do this, have media, have some educational media, right?
Right.
Then just entertainment. I got entertainment too. I got like a 30-something inch television in my crib. You know what I'm saying? I got DVD player and all that. We got DVD CDs. We got all that too. But we got books.
Right.
And so like now, like my daughter, man, she had to do a project on slavery, transatlantic slave trade. And so we were talking. She's like, I gotta go to the library. I said, no, you ain't gotta go to the library. Just go downstairs.
Right.
I pulled about 3, 4, 5 books on the slave trade. I was like, here's your reference material. Right? These books are probably better than what you do in the library anyway. Go check it out. Right? So we need to have homes and churches and hopefully public institutions, educational institutions that are just rich, that are robust, that are that challenge and cause an awe and a curiosity, man, that stress the imagination.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It should be it's a very rich environment home should be. And I understand why people don't. There's some larger history there, there's some forces at work there. They don't want us to do that. Like Chris Rock said, books are like kryptonite to some folk.
Right.
And there's a history and there's a legacy because for centuries that was illegal for us to read. Right? You get killed for reading, knowing how to read. But I was reading the other day, man. I was reading up on some Nat Turner.
Woo!
And actually, Roy Clarkfelter asked me a question about Nat Turner versus Martin Luther King Jr.
Roy, good brother.
Yeah, man.
Good brother.
Yeah, he raised some good questions.
Yeah.
Man. But he was asking me. He asked me a question about Nat Turner. There was another sister posted something on Facebook, and Nat Turner could read. He's very literate, very intelligent, very thoughtful, very well-read brother. And it was odd in that time, right? Well, once he led the slave rebellion, if you study it, study Nat Turner, slave rebellion in Virginia, right? 1830s,
Right.
right? Those who read this need to study this guy. Don't you know, after that rebellion, they made it completely illegal for black people to read. Right? You can get lynched for having a book, but now books are free. Right? You got libraries. Anybody walk in the library and read.
Google.
You can Google, man. Free books on the internet. Amazon always got a free book there. But we got mental slavery going on. We've been told some things. Like black folk, we're not supposed to be readers. We're not supposed to be. We're not supposed to know the language. Right. But I'm like, yo, look at our most radical leaders, man. Look at Malcolm X.
Strong.
Dude memorized the dictionary.
Strong.
Memorized the dictionary. And he ain't a sellout.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? So he mastered the master's language.
That's right.
So
we were talking about church.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that, I'm not combative, man, when it comes to church and churches. I just kind of pull myself away from the madness. Me personally, man, I think that churches become a little too sissified. They paint Jesus as a sissy.
Right.
And Jesus was not a sissy. He was everything but that. I just think that there needs to be more a radical approach in what we call brick and mortar. Right. And you've got 17, and I'm probably over exaggerating, but you've got 17 churches down Long Street, and you would think one day that there could be some type of coalition for one agenda to actually get one thing done when it comes to our African American males, because they're the subject of incarceration and things of that nature. But yeah, I don't know, man. Maybe it's me. Is it me, brother?
Let me be careful how I answer this. But no, I'm just kidding. But I'll say this, man. The Apostle Paul in the New Testament says something interesting one time. He says, I don't come to you except preaching this one thing. And he says, I come to you preaching Christ crucified.
Right.
Now, to the modern ear, that says a couple of things. But a lot of times Christians say, oh, Jesus died for my sins. Right? No, that's too lame. A more modern adaptation would have been Paul saying, no, Christ was assassinated for your sins.
Right.
See, crucifixion was a form of political assassination.
That's right.
It was a form of social control by those in power. So Jesus, who represents a certain politic, a certain way of being in the world, a certain way of connecting with people and building coalition and reconciling and healing and loving and a certain way of doing community, he became a threat to those in power. That's why he had to be killed. Right? And so that's another whole thing. So I always tell people, Jesus just didn't die, like he died of cancer or died of flu, or he just died. No, he was crucified. He was assassinated. He was killed by the state. Right. So that leads to another whole discussion. But the challenge is, I know a lot of pastors, man, all over this country. And I'm getting to know a lot of pastors here locally. And all the pastors that I've met, for the most part, are good men and women.
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt.
But, the challenge is, Albert Einstein said this one time. He says, you can't keep doing the same thing with the same mindset and expect a different outcome. Right, I'm paraphrasing what he said. The same mindset can't produce new things. And Jesus said it the best. He says, you can't pour new wine in old wineskin. Right? So the issues are new, sort of. The challenges that we have in our community are somewhat new. It's morphed. It's like, it's transformed in its appearance and the way it plays itself out in our community. And so how we set our institutions up are going to have to morph too.
That's right.
Right? So new wine, the challenges that we face, the invitation to meet those challenges are new, it need new wine skin.
Dig it.
So new forms of ministry, new shape of ministry. We have to organize differently to address things in our community. And what's happening is that, unfortunately, this is a habit not just in our communities and certain churches in our community, but this is an American thing, where we make the way things are God's, the way God exactly thinks. So the way we do church now comes straight out of heaven, right? Like for instance, I love church. I mean, I like to preach, I like to teach, I love to worship, I love that stuff, right? But oftentimes we look at ministry a certain way as this is the way they did it in the Bible. No. The way you, 21st century, post-industrial, African-American, living in inner city urban space, living in the hood, doing ministry in the hood, ain't the same way that Paul and Jesus did ministry exactly the same way in first century Palestine in an agrarian society. You know what I'm saying? So the world has changed in 2,000 years. The world has changed. Economics has changed. Politics has changed. You know? And so a lot of, like I tell some pastor friends of mine, we organize, we set about institutions of church for a world that no longer exists.
Dig it.
Right? Most of our churches are set up, or institutions that are set up for the 19th century.
Right.
We live in a globalized world now. We live in a more tech world. We live in a world that has a whole bunch of stuff going on in it that's different than 100 years ago. But we still have institutions that are like this hardened and crusted. They don't know. They don't adapt very well to change, and that's why now. And a lot of pastors won't say this, but there's a lot of research happening. The younger generations exponentially are not coming back.
Dig it. Compound.
Yeah.
They're not, man.
But there's hope, though, man.
Yeah.
All pastors got to do is take a posture of innovation. How do I innovate? And that's drawing out the business world. That's drawing out the economic world, right?
Right.
How do I make something new out of something old? Right? How do we make new wineskins? Yeah. Anyway, but yeah.
Take it back. Let's take it back for a minute. Getting back to Rowan County, man. And I know that you've been involved in some organizations, man, grassroots organizations, man, that meet quite often, that game plan for certain things or what have you.
Right.
And just by the conversations that we've had pertaining to the government here in the county, man, I don't think it tastes too good to you and others. And I've kind of, and I guess being here for that 4-year stint, man, you've actually seen a lot in that amount of time.
Right.
However, I think I was talking to you the other day about the council, and the council at one point in time being the commission, and the commission being the council, and things of that nature. And everybody has their own opinion, but what do you see as an outsider? Is in terms of government here in Rowan County?
From the city to the county, man, I see people who really care about their community, man, in their own way.
Right.
In their own way. And this to be quite honest with you, the people who are in power here are put in power by a very small percentage of the electorate. Right. Just for instance, this last city council election, right? Which it was kind of funny because the Salisbury Post, one of the incumbents of the city council who got re-voted in, or re-elected rather, said that the people put us back in. They must have really trusted us. But I'm like, yeah, but you got about 15%, if that, of the electorate. So 15% of the population that can vote put y'all back in. What about the other 85%?
Right.
Right. So the people didn't put you back in. 15% of those who could vote put you back in. And that's a totally different conversation, you know what I'm saying? So my point is that I think, that doesn't really speak to the character or individuals per se. But just engaging people, I sense that people do care. But on a larger scale, it's something not good when a very small percentage of the population engages in that issue, and they supposedly represent the people. The challenge is they normally represent just that 15%, whoever that might be. But a lot of this stuff is just, stuff we see in the media is ego clashing. And from what I can tell, there's some long-standing history there of offense, personal offense. I'm picking up on that. I expect more from political and public leaders, especially in the public eye. It doesn't mean you can't, we should give you permission to be human. You're human. We get that, you know what I'm saying? But the issues are too great in our community right now to have people that have these little personal kind of feuds with each other over little stupid stuff, you know what I'm saying? Because, the achievement gap is growing here, the quote-unquote game population is growing here, the industry, the people who historically worked in the textile and the manufacturing, that stuff has vanished or vanishing, right? And so, where are they going to get jobs? And so there's that whole conversation about that piece. So we need leaders that don't get these petty feuds, and the issues are so great in the community, man. So that's how I interpret that whole thing. I don't make too much of it other than that, There just needs to be more discipline, you know what I'm saying? And not, realize that you represent a larger group of people, not just those who voted for you. Right. Even if people don't vote, you still represent their interests. You're still their political leader, right? So, and another thing too, man, is that I don't see a lot of when you study like social transformation, like with a city or a country, when they get to the brink, when they get to the nadir, to the bottom, when the things are like getting really bad. Right, it could be some violence or massive poverty or something like that. The societies that have made great strides to transform their communities is when they bring all the stakeholders to the table. Right? So it's not just those in power coming together in a closed room session discussing the fate and the destiny of an entire community. Everybody comes to the table. So you have representatives from every neighborhood.
Right.
Known leaders, indigenous leaders who've been in the community, but they may not have formal titles.
Right.
People like yourself, right? You don't have a formal title, right, in the system, but you're an informal leader in the community, right? So those stakeholders, everybody that come to the table, those from the top to the bottom to the middle, from law enforcement to politics to churches, everybody come to the table and say, hey, let's work this out. These are a set of issues that, let's just find one issue that we all can do together. Let's process that. Let's look at the history. Let's be honest about what brought us to this place, right? Let's get creative with this thing. It's some ideas to respond to stuff in our community, rather than getting into these little partisan ego battles between individual political leaders. You know what I'm saying? So,
yeah,
that's a mouthful, man.
In a utopian society, man, I think that definitely could exist.
That's what happened in South Africa.
Yeah.
When the apartheid regime fell,
right,
de Klerk freed Mandela from prison and affirmed and validated Mandela's political party, African National Congress, right, the ANC. And they went through a process called the Truth and Racial, the Truth. I just dropped out of my head.
Do you think that he didn't want to be the Pontius Pilate of his day, de Klerk?
Initially, yeah.
Yeah.
But what happened is the Truth and Reconciliation Committee brought all the stakeholders, all the leaders, all the different voices together. And they said, we got to change what happened. And so they would have these meetings, man, when a cop who was known who had killed a young black man in a certain community, right? His family would be right there at the table, right across from him, and he would confess, and they would listen.